Let's begin with something most people never question. What if most of what's making you anxious isn't even real? Not in the sense of being imaginary, but in the deeper sense that you're not reacting to life itself. You're reacting to a filtered version of it, one shaped by your past, your unresolved emotions, your unconscious beliefs. Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." And nowhere is this more visible than in your reaction to stress. Two people get fired on the same day. One spirals into despair, the other smiles, sees an opening, a chance to start again. Same event, two completely different realities. Why? Because reality isn't what happens. It's what your mind does with what happens. And if your mind is shaped by unprocessed fear, shame, trauma, then even neutral events can feel catastrophic. That's why it's not the situation that breaks you. It's the meaning you attach to it. And that meaning, it's not objective. It's a story, a mental reflex rehearsed for years that now plays automatically every time life wobbles. You don't even hear it anymore. It is your voice, but pause here. That voice that says, "I'm not good enough. This always happens to me. Everything is falling apart." Whose voice is that really? Your parents, your teachers, that one moment in childhood that shaped your whole identity? You see, your brain is designed to conserve energy. So instead of analyzing every moment from scratch, it relies on scripts, emotional shortcuts it learned long ago. And for most people, those scripts are outdated, written by fear, edited by trauma, directed by insecurity. So when something uncertain happens, your system doesn't ask what's true. It just replays the old track. You're not safe, you're not enough, brace for pain. And this is why so many people live in reaction mode. They're not present, they're not grounded. They're acting out a nervous system script that was never designed by them in the first place. But here's the hope. Once you see the script, you don't have to follow it. That gap between stimulus and response is your moment of freedom. But to reach it, you have to learn to observe yourself without flinching. You have to stop believing every anxious thought and start investigating it. Where did this come from? Does it serve me? Is this me, or just a leftover survival reflex from a time when I didn't know better? Because if you don't ask, you'll keep living a life that feels chaotic. Not because it is, but because your internal lens is cracked. It's not about fixing everything. It's about seeing clearly for the first time. And that clarity, it begins with stillness. But stillness isn't always peaceful. Sometimes it's terrifying. Because in silence, your mind stops running, and everything you've been avoiding finally catches up. Tell me honestly, what do you do when it gets quiet? Not outside, inside. When there's no music, no scrolling, no one texting, just you and your thoughts. Do you sit with them? Or do you run? Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people would rather distract than reflect. They don't reach for their phone because they're curious. They reach for it because they're afraid. Afraid of the stillness. Afraid of the questions that creep in when the world goes quiet. Carl Jung said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." And you've seen this. You've lived it. You fill your calendar. You keep the TV running in the background. You replay old conversations just to avoid hearing your own silence. Why? Because when the noise stops, the truth starts talking. The truth that your identity is built on things you no longer believe in. The truth that most of your anxiety isn't about the future. It's about control. You don't want clarity, you want certainty, and life doesn't offer that, so your mind spins. What if I fail? What if they leave? What if I never figure this out? But those aren't questions. They're armor, an attempt to pre-feel the pain so maybe you won't have to feel it later. It doesn't work. It never worked. Because anxiety isn't a predictor. It's a projector. It doesn't tell you the future. It shows you a distorted version of the past playing on loop dressed up as tomorrow. That's why it feels so convincing. It has the voice of your memory, but the fear of your childhood. So what do? We try to control everything, overplan, rehearse every conversation, fix everyone else's mood. But control is a nervous system addiction. The more you try to control, the more anxious you become when you realize you can't. And here's the deeper layer. It's not just that you want control, it's that you equate control with safety. You believe, if I can predict it, I can survive it. But life doesn't play by that rule. Uncertainty is baked into reality. So what's the real solution? Not more control, but more capacity. More capacity to feel discomfort. More capacity to sit in not knowing. More capacity to witness chaos and not become it. That's the essence of Jung's work. Not to escape the shadow, but to turn toward it. Because the more you suppress your discomfort, the louder it gets. But the moment you sit with it, not to fix, not to flee, just to observe, it begins to lose its power. So the next time anxiety comes, don't ask, how do I make this stop? Ask, what part of me still believes I'm unsafe? That's where the real healing begins, and in the next breath, you may finally realize you were never in danger, you were just out of presence. Let me ask you something. Have you ever tried to change and failed? You read the books, you took the courses, you swore you'd react differently next time. But when the moment came, you snapped, you shut down, you went back to the old pattern. Why? Because you're not fighting laziness, you're not fighting ignorance, you're fighting automation. Carl Jung called it the complex, an emotional charge buried deep in the psyche that hijacks your thoughts, your body, your voice, and runs the show. Most people don't live their life, they relive it. The same fears, the same arguments, the same self-sabotage over and over. It's not fate. It's not a curse, it's programming. Neuroscience shows that nearly 95% of your behavior is unconscious, and up to 40% of your daily actions are just habits. Automatic loops that repeat until interrupted. Think about that. Almost half of your day is not a decision. It's a rerun, a predictable reaction based on patterns that started years ago, patterns that once protected you, but now control you. Here's a simple example. Someone disagrees with you, your chest tightens. You get defensive. You interrupt, explain, justify. But why? Because somewhere in your past, disagreement meant danger. Maybe it was a critical parent, a strict teacher, a moment where your voice was punished instead of heard, and that emotional blueprint, still active, still deciding how you show up, not because you choose it, but because your nervous system is trying to keep you alive, even when the threat is long gone. You don't have an anger problem. You have an unprocessed memory. You don't have a confidence issue. You have a nervous system that never learned what safety feels like. And here's the hardest part to admit. You think you're reacting to now, but most of the time, you're reacting to then. This is why real change feels so hard, because your identity is woven into these patterns. You don't just think, I'm anxious, you become the anxious one. You don't just fear rejection. You become the one who avoids being seen, and the mind that protects that identity, even if it's painful, because it's familiar, and familiarity feels like safety. That's why discomfort is a gift, because every time you feel the urge to react, to run, to lash out, to shrink, it's a doorway, a moment to choose something new, not easy, but possible. Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life. And you will call it fate. But once you see it, You can step out of it, not all at once, not perfectly, but piece by piece. Awareness is the crowbar that cracks the script open. And through that crack, something else begins to emerge. Not your reaction, not your trauma, but your true self. And that is where the return begins. You've been told, just be yourself. But no one ever asked, which self? The one shaped by childhood wounds? The one built around approval? The one that kept you safe but small? Because here's the truth, most people are loyal to the version of themselves that was built for survival, not for wholeness. You became the strong one, and the smart one, and the quiet one, and the funny one. But what if that was never you? What if it was just the mask that got the most praise and the least pain? Carl Jung called it the persona. A mask you show the world, and we all wear it. Not because we're fake, but because we're afraid of not being accepted. Afraid of being too much, afraid of being real. But here's where the fracture begins. The longer you perform, the more you forget you're acting. You wake up every day inside a role and call it you. But underneath it, there's another self. The one you buried to survive. The one you edited to be loved. The one you forgot because remembering hurt too much. That self is still alive. Still watching, still waiting. And when you get quiet enough, when you stop trying to manage everyone else's perception, you hear it whisper, I'm still here. This is what Jung meant when he spoke of individuation. The process of becoming whole, not perfect, not socially acceptable, whole. And to do that, you have to let go of the performance. You have to walk away from the version of you that was built around fear. Because yes, that mask kept you safe. But now, it's keeping you stuck. You don't need to become someone else. You just need to stop being what you're not. And the moment you do, everything shifts. You stop chasing. You stop defending. You stop trying to prove anything to anyone. Because when you finally own who you are, even the flawed, messy, unsure parts, you become something most people never touch. Grounded, unshakable, not because nothing affects you, but because nothing defines you. You're no longer a puppet pulled by reactions. You're a presence that chooses. And that's power. That's peace. That's who you were before they named you, before they praised you, before they broke you. And that self, he doesn't scream, he doesn't beg, he just waits. And when you're ready, he hands you the pen, because the final act of healing is authorship. The moment you stop performing for love and start writing your life from truth. But to do that, you must return. There comes a moment, quiet, undramatic, unmistakable, when the noise inside finally dies down and you realize you were never weak. You were just distracted by the script, by the masks, by the fear of being seen for who you really are, and the terror of not being seen at all. But now the roles feel hollow, the applause feels cheap, and the voice that once whispered now roars. You don't want more validation. You want truth. You want a life that doesn't collapse every time someone leaves. A mind that doesn't panic every time something changes. A center that holds, even when the world does not. And the only way to find that is silence. Not the silence of apathy, but the silence of clarity. The kind of silence that isn't empty. It's full of power, full of presence, full of everything you tried to find in other people. Because now you know. You were never missing anything. You were just too noisy to hear yourself. And once you hear it, that steady voice beneath the storm, you don't go back, not to panic, not to pretending, not to chasing broken mirrors hoping they'll reflect wholeness. You begin to live from center. You begin to walk without explanation. You begin to choose, not react. And nothing shakes you now. Not because life got easier, but because you got real. This is what Carl Jung meant when he said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And now you're becoming. Not someone new, but someone honest. The kind of man or woman who doesn't just cope, but creates. Creates calm in chaos, creates meaning from pain, creates silence. Where the world expects a scream, and that's the shift, that's the moment it all turns. When you stop asking the world for peace and start building it inside. Not because it's easy, but because it's yours. So here's the invitation. Burn the old script, let the mask fall, turn down the volume, and listen, because everything you've been looking for, the strength, the freedom, the peace, it's not out there. It's been waiting in your stillness the entire time. And now that you're here, right, not the next excuse, not the next apology, not the next role they'll clap for. Write the first real page, the one that doesn't need approval, only truth. Welcome back, welcome home.